"If you can dance this waltz," she said, swirling the champagne in her glass with a smirk sharp enough to draw blood, "I'll marry you." The room fell silent, as if the chandeliers above had sucked every ounce of breath from the air. Leighton Hall had never seen a scandal, at least not one that wasn't swept under Persian rugs and polished marble. But tonight it would remember. Aurora Leighton, 38, stood at the center of the grand ballroom draped in midnight blue velvet and diamond disdain. Behind her, 100 of Manhattan's elite froze mid-sip, their laughter curling into awkward stillness like smoke losing momentum. Her voice had carried across the gilded space with perfect theatrical precision because Aurora never did anything accidentally. In front of her, still crouched near the shattered remains of a priceless centerpiece, was a janitor. One knee on the floor, one hand gently shielding the head of a little girl with tangled curls and flushed cheeks. A girl who couldn't be older than 7. "Daddy?" "I didn't mean to," the child whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "I know," the man said, calm as stone under pressure. "It's okay, Lena." He looked up. That was the moment everything changed. Not because he made a scene. He didn't. Not because he begged for forgiveness or cowered or cursed. No, he just looked up, straight into the eyes of the most powerful woman in the room, and he did it without fear. His face was lean-lined from grief rather than age. A scar ran along the edge of his jaw like a memory he never wanted to forget. His janitor's uniform bore the faint creases of long nights and hard choices. But his posture, it didn't match the suit. It belonged to someone who used to command attention, not mop up after it. "You'll marry me?" he asked, his voice low and deliberate. "For a dance." A few snorts of laughter echoed around the room. Someone clinked a glass in sarcastic applause. Aurora arched one perfect eyebrow, almost amused at his audacity. "I suppose I'll need some form of entertainment to justify this little disaster," she said. "Don't you think, ladies and gentlemen?" Polite chuckles rippled across the ballroom. Gabe Easton slowly rose to his feet, helping his daughter stand behind him. His right hand was bleeding from picking up the shards. He didn't notice. "I accept," he said quietly. "But not for your hand." Aurora blinked. "Excuse me, I'll dance," he continued. "But not because I want to be your husband. I'll dance because you think this is funny." Now the silence was heavier, more uncomfortable. He turned to his daughter and whispered something in her ear. The little girl nodded and walked toward the ballroom's side door, where a security guard stepped aside, seemingly unsure whether to stop her or salute her. "Someone cue the music," Aurora said with a wave of her hand. "Let's get this farce over with." One of her assistants fumbled toward the DJ booth, unsure which playlist to pick for what had now become the city's strangest public humiliation. But before the music began, a voice cut through the tension. Miss Leighton came a gravelly baritone from the edge of the crowd. Marcus, the head of building security, stepped forward. "Might I suggest the house orchestra you spent $50,000 flying them in?" Aurora's lips twitched. "Fine," she said, turning back to the janitor. "A proper waltz it is. You have 3 minutes. Impress me." He didn't reply. He stepped onto the floor alone. The room rearranged itself as if on instinct, giving him space, though no one would admit they were suddenly curious. The musicians adjusted nervously, then began. A slow Viennese waltz, elegant and grand. And Gabe Easton closed his eyes. Not for drama, not for show, but like a man about to speak in a language no one had heard in years. And then he moved. Not with flair, not at first. There were no grand twirls or flashy footwork, just movement, controlled, clean, as if the air around him bent to the rhythm of his spine. Then came a slow turn, a perfectly timed pivot that made several guests unconsciously lean forward. "He's not just one," whispered, then caught herself. Aurora crossed her arms, her smirk fading. Gabe picked up momentum, not with speed but with intention. The kind of momentum that's earned, not performed. Every step revealed more than grace. It revealed memory, pain, discipline, loss, pride. The ballroom was no longer watching a janitor. They were watching a man who used to be something else, who still was. His feet glided, spun, stopped. He danced not for applause. He danced to remind the world that a man's worth isn't measured by the floor he cleans, but by the fire he refuses to extinguish. And then, without flourish, without bows, he stopped. 3 minutes. Exactly. The music faded. The room stayed silent. Someone clapped once, twice. Then the entire ballroom erupted. Not a standing ovation, not yet, but applause real enough to make Aurora's chest tighten. She hadn't expected to feel anything. She certainly hadn't expected to feel small. Gabe turned and walked off the dance floor. Not toward her. Toward the door his daughter had disappeared behind. But before he left, he paused. "I don't need your hand," he said loud enough for her to hear. "But you might need to ask yourself what it costs to look down on people who know how to rise." Then he disappeared into the hallway, leaving only a shocked room, a burning silence, and one very shaken queen standing in the ruins of her own arrogance. Aurora Layton didn't respond, because for the first time in a very long time, she didn't know what to say. The morning after the gala, Manhattan shimmered in its usual illusion of control. Coffee cups clinked in boardrooms, luxury sedans slid across Fifth Avenue, and headlines spun stories just sanitized enough to keep the city moving. But behind the frosted glass doors of Layton Capital Aurora's kingdom was no longer silent. Did she actually say she'd marry him? Who was he? Just some janitor? No one dances like that unless they've trained for years. The whispers slithered through the hallways like cigarette smoke in a velvet curtain, thin, persistent, and impossible to scrub out. Aurora stood at the head of the executive conference table, face unreadable fingers wrapped around a porcelain coffee mug that hadn't been sipped. Her PR chief, Francesca, clicked through slides on a digital screen like diffusing a bomb. "This one's from the Daily Whisper," she said without looking up. Caption reads, "Cinderella in reverse CEO proposes to custodian during gala meltdown." The image showed Aurora, mid-toast, Gabe, frozen mid-turn on the dance floor, backlit like a ghost refusing to die. Aurora finally spoke. "It was a joke." "Of course," Francesca replied quickly. "We've drafted a statement clarifying it was a light-hearted comment taken out of context." Number Aurora straightened. "We say nothing." The room tensed. "But let them talk." Her voice was calm, but it cut steel. "The more we explain, the more real it becomes." Francesca nodded, though the corners of her mouth twitched in silent protest. The room emptied within minutes the way it always did when Aurora closed the gate on conversation. But Francesca wasn't the only one uncomfortable with silence, because silence had a way of revealing fractures even Diamond couldn't hide. Aurora turned to the window behind her. From the 52nd floor, the city looked harmless, small, contained. Nothing like the man who had danced across her marble floors and made her look foolish in front of everyone she'd ever tried to impress. Not because he was loud, but because he hadn't been. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't grandstanded. He hadn't asked for applause. And still he owned the room. That was the part she couldn't shake. Worse, the part she couldn't explain. Her phone buzzed. A message from the school. Lena Easton was involved in a minor incident today. No injuries, but please speak with her father. Some students made inappropriate comments regarding last night's event. Aurora stared at the screen. Lena Easton. So that was the girl's name. She remembered the way the child had clung to her father's leg cheeks, flushed eyes wide, not with shame, but with worry. Not for herself, but for him. It had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The children at those events were usually accessories. Stiff dresses, forced smiles, monogrammed shoes. But that little girl had clutched a drawing, a sketch of the gala hall in messy crayon lines with stick figures dancing in the center. One of them had a mop in his hand, and still he danced. She could see it now, even without closing her eyes. The grace, the stillness, the way he held the air like it had betrayed him once and he'd never forgotten. That evening, the janitor's closet smelled like bleach-wet cement and secrets. Gabe Easton stood in the center of the room, mop in one hand, sweat on his brow from the day's rounds. He moved slowly, rhythmically, letting the push and pull of muscle memory soothe what words could not. Lena sat on an overturned bucket, arms crossed, cheeks puffed with injustice. "They called you Cinderella's janitor," she said, scowling. Gabe didn't stop mopping. "That's not even funny," she added. "No, he said it's not." She swung her feet. "Did you mean it? When you said you'd dance for her, I didn't dance for her," Gabe replied. "I danced because she laughed at you." Lena looked up surprised. "At me? She wasn't just mocking me, kiddo. She was mocking the way you looked when you tripped. Like we didn't belong in that room. Like the way you held my hand embarrassed her." Lena was quiet for a moment. "I liked that room," she said. It was shiny. Gabe finally stopped leaning on the mop like an old soldier might on his rifle. It was built to make people like us feel small. "But you made it look small," Lena whispered. Gabe chuckled. "Then maybe we got our message across." Across the building, on the security monitor in his office, Marcus had watched the entire exchange from the hallway camera feed. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Son of a gun," he muttered. "Still got it." The man had seen things in his 20 years working security in Manhattan's high towers. CEOs cheating on their wives, politicians stealing art interns having breakdowns in stairwells. But he'd never seen someone make a ballroom full of billionaires hold their breath. He picked up an old newspaper clipping from a locked drawer. Yellowed, folded and refolded until the edges curled like secrets. Gabriel Easton Broadway's brightest flame. He had watched him once at the Majestic Theater years ago, with his wife Elena front row. That man hadn't just danced. He'd told stories with his body made people weep without words, until the accident, until the press said he was done. Marcus shook his head. Press never did know what they were talking about. Meanwhile, Aurora was still staring at her phone, an unsent message blinking on screen. "Mr. Easton, I owe you an apology." She deleted it, typed again. "If you'd be willing to meet," deleted. Typed again, paused. Instead, she stood, grabbed her coat, and headed for the freight elevator. 20 minutes later, she stood outside the janitor's locker room, staring at the name taped to the door. G. Easton. Her knuckles hovered an inch from the wood. She wasn't used to asking anything from anyone. But something about the way the girl had looked at him like he was her whole world made her hesitate. Aurora Layton, the woman who had outnegotiated Silicon Valley giants, couldn't bring herself to knock on a janitor's door. And for the first time in her adult life, she felt like the one who didn't belong. No one ever teaches you how to search for someone you once humiliated. Aurora sat alone in her penthouse office that night long after the lights of Layton Tower had dimmed. Her shoes were off, her hair slightly unpinned, but her poise remained an armor that had never cracked, until now. She scrolled absently through her tablet, pretending to review investor briefings, but her mind wasn't on quarterly earnings. It was stuck on a name, a pair of eyes, a dance that had unspooled something tightly wound inside her for years. Gabrielle Easton, a name she hadn't spoken aloud yet, but tonight she would. She opened her browser, typed Gabrielle Easton Dancer. The screen took a breath, then loaded. There it was, Broadway's brightest flame, snuffed out too soon. The tragedy of Gabe and Elena Easton. She clicked. The article was dated 15 years ago. A glossy black and white photo filled the screen, Gabe mid-lift, his arms effortlessly supporting a woman in a flowing white dress. Both were airborne, both impossibly elegant. The caption read, Gabe and Elena Easton perform Winter's Requiem in their final public duet December 18, 2010. Aurora stared. She knew that piece. She'd seen it performed before, years ago, She hadn't realized the man on stage then and the janitor now were the same person. Back then, Gabe Easton had been a rising star acclaimed for blending raw emotion with technical perfection. A dancer who didn't perform to impress. He danced to confess. And Elena, his wife, had been just as magnetic. A choreographer, a muse, a partner in every sense. Aurora kept reading. After a benefit gala for pediatric cancer, the couple was struck by a drunk driver on the FDR Drive. Elena Easton died at the scene. Gabe Easton was hospitalized in critical condition. Doctors initially believed he would never walk again. Her fingers trembled on the glass. There was no follow-up. No interview. No public comeback. The man had disappeared. Until now. Aurora leaned back, eyes burning. 15 years, she whispered. What did we do to him? She remembered now barely Elena's name on a rehearsal list from decades past. A conflict, a fallout, something small at the time, meaningless even. Aurora had insisted on the lead role. Elena had walked. But now the past had a face, and a daughter, and a pair of eyes that hadn't flinched when she mocked him. The next morning, Gabe was back on duty before sunrise. That's how he liked it. Before the suits arrived. Before the elevators filled with perfume and pretense. Just him, the silence, and the quiet ritual of making a place clean even when the world around him wasn't. He didn't notice the figure at the far end of the corridor until he reached the 10th floor. Aurora, in heels again. This time without the smirk. I thought CEOs didn't take the freight elevator, he said without looking at her. I thought janitors didn't read architectural blueprints, she replied. But I've seen your handwriting on the service routes. You reorganized the emergency exit plan. He paused. Wasn't safe before. Exactly. They stood there for a beat, two people who shouldn't have anything to say to each other. And yet, I looked you up, she said finally. I figured. I saw the footage of Winter's Requiem. I remember that night. He didn't respond. I didn't know it was you. You didn't want to know, Gabe said evenly. No one does. It's easier to pretend a mop in someone's hand means they never held anything else. Aurora's throat tightened. He wasn't angry. That would have been easier. But his voice carried something sharper disappointment without expectation, like someone who'd long since stopped waiting for people to change. I came to say... She stopped, caught on the word she hated most. Sorry. She nodded. That dance you did, she said, forcing the words. At the gala, I haven't stopped thinking about it. Most people haven't, he replied, but not for the right reasons. I didn't know how else to diffuse the tension, she said, flinching slightly at how small the excuse sounded aloud. I panicked. I used sarcasm like a weapon. That's kind of my thing. I don't dance to entertain mockery, he said. I know that now. Gabe stared at her. What do you want, Ms. Layton? The formal sting in his voice made her flinch more than she expected. I want to understand, she said, quieter. I want to know how someone comes back from what you did. I watched you fly across a floor meant to trap you. I watched you carry your child out like a king in coveralls. I don't know many people who could do that. He tilted his head. Why does it matter? Because I can't stop seeing it, she admitted. Not just the dance, but the way you looked at me, like I was the one who needed saving. For a second, the only sound was the distant hum of the building's generator. Then Gabe said, when someone loses everything, they either break or they break open. She swallowed. And you, I broke open, and I rebuilt quietly. Aurora looked down, ashamed of the heels the suit the tower built on assumptions. I want to learn, she said finally, not just how to waltz, but how to stop standing above people who've survived more than I ever will. Gabe gave her a long look. Then for the first time a flicker of something close to amusement touched his lips. You want me to teach you to dance? I want to learn how to stop performing, she replied, and I don't think I can do that alone. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, Tuesday. 6 a.m. Service Corridor 3B. Bring flat shoes. She blinked. You're serious? You want real, he said, turning away. It starts where people stop pretending. That night, Aurora skipped the town car and walked home. Past people she never noticed. Past buildings she'd once looked down on. The city looked different now, like a place not just built for winners but for the bruised and brilliant who kept moving anyway. She stopped at a crosswalk. A boy selling roses approached her with a limp and a smile. She bought one, for once not to impress, but because beauty, she realized, didn't need a pedestal. It just needed a chance. The lights in the school gymnasium flickered like they couldn't decide whether to stay awake or give in to the weight of another Tuesday evening. Folding chairs lined the walls. Cheap red and white banners from last semester's science fair still hung crookedly above the snack table. And yet in the center of the worn wooden floor, magic was about to happen. It was Lena's school fundraiser, a modest evening with paper tickets, lukewarm lemonade, and third graders selling handmade bracelets. The flyer said talent showcase, but everyone knew it was mostly for the parents. Something soft, something cute. And then Gabe Easton walked in. He wasn't on the program. No one had planned for it. But when Principal Dwyer saw him standing at the side of the stage with Lena, his daughter's hand clasped in his, she simply nodded. Because sometimes the best kind of permission is the kind no one asks for. Lena wore a navy dress with a twirlable skirt, white sneakers, and a crooked little bow she had tied herself. Gabe wore his janitor uniform. No pretense, just presence. The music began an old jazz waltz with a slightly warped vinyl crackle. Lena took a deep breath. Gabe extended his hand, and then they danced. Not like professionals, not even like performers, but like two people who had survived something together, something invisible but binding. Lena giggled when she missed a step. Gabe smiled and slowed the pace to match her. His movements were deliberate, not polished, not perfect, but imbued with a warmth that melted even the most skeptical glances from the bleachers. There was a stillness in the air, like the gym itself had stopped breathing, afraid to disrupt the moment. In the back row, unnoticed by most, Aurora Layton sat alone, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She had almost turned around twice, but something told her she needed to see this not from her office, not through a security camera, but in real life where scuffed gym floors met bare truth. She watched as Gabe spun his daughter, gently catching her with a father's grace that no choreographer could ever teach. And for the first time in years, Aurora felt a lump form in her throat that wasn't from pride or stress or champagne. It was humility, the kind that comes when life reminds you haven't seen everything. Next to her, an older woman whispered to her husband, "Isn't that the janitor from Layton Tower?" "Can't be," he replied. "That man dances like he was born on stage." Aurora leaned forward, elbows on knees, and whispered to herself, "He was." After the applause, and there was plenty, Gabe helped Lena bow, then led her off stage to a crowd of smiling parents and beaming teachers. The noise swelled with compliments and chatter. "Where'd you learn that? You two were amazing. You should be in a show." Gabe smiled graciously, never boastful, always listening, until one voice broke through, soft but familiar. "You lied." Aurora said, her arms now uncrossed. "You said you didn't dance for people." He turned slowly, expression unreadable. "I didn't," he said. "I danced with someone." She blinked. "Touché." Gabe motioned for Lena to run ahead to the juice table, then turned fully toward Aurora. "You came," he said simply. "I did." "Why?" "Because I needed to see if you were real." And he asked. Aurora paused. Then, "You're too real, it turns out. It's inconvenient." He chuckled. "Real tends to be." "I didn't know she could dance like that." She added, eyes on Lena. "She can't," Gabe said. "She just trusts that I'll catch her." That line hit her harder than she let on. Trust. It had been a long time since anyone had said that word to her without expecting a contract, a contingency, or a witness. "I never had that," Aurora murmured more to herself than to him. Gabe nodded. It's never too late. A pause. Then she reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small envelope. What's this, an invitation, she said, to a small private event. Next weekend. Donor appreciation for our arts foundation. I'm not a donor. Your presence will raise more money than 10 check writers combined. I'm not a prop, either. Aurora raised an eyebrow. You think I'd invite you to be a spectacle? I think you don't know what you're inviting yet. She smiled. Then teach me. That silence between them. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was earned. The night wind was soft as Gabe walked Lena home under the glow of street lamps. She skipped ahead, humming the melody from their dance, unaware of the heavy thoughts pulling at her father's shoulders. Daddy, she asked without looking back. Yeah, baby. Why did the Miss Aurora come? Gabe hesitated, because she needed to remember something. Like what, that even tall towers get lonely? Lena stopped, looked up at him. Will you dance with her too? Gabe looked down at his daughter's innocent face, her trust in the world still whole. If she ever learns to hear the music, he said softly. Maybe I will. Back at her high-rise apartment, Aurora stood in front of her mirror, removed her earrings, wiped off her makeup. But instead of climbing into bed, she went to her bookshelf, found an old DVD marked Winter's Requiem, and slid it into the player. There, in grainy footage, was a younger Gabe Easton, alive, on fire. The way he looked at his wife was the way no man had ever looked at her. Not for power, not for beauty, but for presence. As the final notes played and the screen dimmed, Aurora whispered, How did I never see this? And somewhere deep within her, somewhere the suits and shareholders and press releases had never touched. Aurora Layton felt something shift. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but undeniably. A hairline fracture in the armor, and this time she didn't rush to cover it up. The cemetery was quiet, too quiet for Manhattan. No taxis honking, no phones ringing. Just the sound of wind rustling through sycamore trees as if even the city knew to lower its voice here. Aurora stood still. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. No chauffeur, no assistant, no itinerary. Just a handwritten note copied from an old article. Elena Easton, 1981-2010, beloved wife, dancer, mother. The headstone was modest. No grand etching, no marble angels, just a clean, graceful slab tucked near the edge of the property. It faced east toward the sun, toward light. She didn't know what she'd expected. Flowers, candles. A crowd. But there was only one thing at the base of the stone, a single folded piece of paper, unsealed, weather-stained, left recently. Aurora hesitated, then picked it up. The writing was unmistakably Gabe's, compact, steady, etched with intention. She unfolded it slowly, and though she knew it wasn't hers to read, something inside whispered, This letter wasn't meant to stay hidden. Elena, I promised I'd take care of her. I failed once. I won't again. Sometimes I still hear your voice when Lena laughs. You were the rhythm behind every step I ever took, and without you I lost the beat. But I'm trying. God knows I'm trying. She's got your stubbornness, your fire, and your hands. She draws like you used to on the apartment walls. I wish you'd seen her last night. I danced with her, on stage. Just us, and it didn't hurt. Not like before. Someone's watching me again, Elena. Someone I never thought would look twice, and for the first time in years I'm not afraid of being seen. I don't know where this leads, but I want you to know I'm still here, still trying to be the man you believed in. G. Aurora folded the letter carefully, hands trembling. There it was, raw, unfiltered, wholly in its vulnerability, and she was standing in it like a trespasser. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on her balcony wrapped in a wool blanket, the city shimmering beneath her like a sea of false stars. In her hand, a cup of untouched tea. In her heart, something unnameable. Gabe Easton had loved. Fiercely, quietly, endlessly. And now, he was starting to live again. Not to forget. Not to replace. but to remember differently. She thought about Lena's eyes, about how they brightened around her father like he was both anchor and wings. She thought about the way Gabe had offered her his silence, not as punishment, but as protection. He could have destroyed her reputation. He didn't. She rose from her chair and walked to the bookshelf. Her hand moved over dusty spines until it landed on one, The Art of Choreography. Elena Easton had been credited in the back. A minor mention, a footnote. But Aurora remembered now. How Elena had once auditioned for a Layton Foundation grant. How she'd been passed over because Aurora, freshly promoted, eager to impress, had sided with a bigger name. She remembered Elena's poised goodbye. No protest, no tears, just a quiet walk away. And that chair at the gala, the one reserved for a special guest that night, it had sat empty. Unintentionally, but symbolically. The next morning, Gabe found a package on the maintenance bench where he clocked in. No note, just his name written in black ink on a cream envelope. Inside was a pair of leather dance shoes, size 12. Hand-stitched, clean. He stared at them for a long time, then reached into the box again. Tucked beneath the tissue paper folded in half was a postcard. The front showed a painting Degas' The Dance Class. On the back, 5 words. The world forgot. I didn't. He exhaled low and slow. That evening, Gabe didn't mop the lobby. He didn't check the boiler room or change the elevator lights. Instead, he walked to the roof of Layton Tower and waited. Aurora arrived 5 minutes later. No suit, no heels, no entourage, just a quiet resolve. Why her grave? He asked softly. I needed to meet the part of you I couldn't touch. She was everything Gabe said. Still is. I know, Aurora replied. That's why I didn't say I was sorry for what I saw. I'm sorry for what I missed. He nodded, as if to acknowledge her choice to stand in discomfort rather than escape it. I never meant for this to be personal, she added. That's the problem, Gabe said. Nothing is ever personal until it happens to you. They stood in silence, the city sprawling beneath them like a broken promise. Then she asked, Do you still dance for her? He smiled faintly. Every time. Then teach me, she whispered. He looked at her. You want to dance? He asked. I want to understand, she corrected. I want to move through something, instead of around it. He studied her, then extended a hand. Not tonight, she said, half laughing. I'm wearing the wrong shoes. He dropped his hand, but not his gaze. Next week, Tuesday. Same time, she nodded. Bring sneakers, he added. Flat ones you can fall in. That night, Aurora wrote her first letter in 15 years. To no one in particular. Sometimes the people we hurt the most are the ones we didn't see coming. Not because they were hiding, but because we were looking the wrong way. I thought power came from having the tallest view. But maybe real power is choosing who you see when you look down. She folded the letter, placed it in her nightstand, and turned off the lamp. And, for the first time in a long, long time, Aurora Layton slept without armor. Left foot forward. Right foot follows. Don't think, just feel. Aurora furrowed her brow, glaring at the scuffed floor of the service corridor as if it had personally offended her. Her black sneakers squeaked awkwardly with every step. This is ridiculous, she muttered. Only if you're trying to look graceful, Gabe replied, arms folded, leaning against the utility sink like he had all the time in the world. I am trying to look graceful. There's your first mistake. Aurora stopped mid-step and turned to him, panting lightly. You didn't tell me it would be this humiliating. Gabe gave a small shrug. You asked me to teach you how to move through something, not perform for it. Healing's messy. So is learning. She wiped sweat from her brow with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. What's the difference between dancing and performing anyway? Performing is when the world is watching, Gabe said. Dancing is when you finally stop caring if it is. For a moment, the corridor was quiet. Then Aurora stepped forward again this time, slower, listening, really listening to the echo of her own feet against the concrete. Better, Gabe said. Still stiff, but better. She smirked. You make a terrible motivational speaker. I'm not here to motivate you, he said. I'm here to witness you. The words landed harder than he probably intended, because that's what she'd spent her whole life chasing, wasn't it, witness? Recognition. Eyes on her not just for power, but for proof she existed. And yet, here in a fluorescent-lit hallway covered in dust and paint scuffs, she felt more seen than in any boardroom she'd ever conquered. The next morning, she arrived early. Gabe was already there, stretching quietly, a Bluetooth speaker beside him, playing soft instrumental jazz. You're early, he said without turning. I wanted to try something, she said. Something I read about in a book once. Gabe glanced at her. Oh. She took a deep breath. I brought a blindfold. That made him pause. I want to stop seeing myself the way the world sees me, she explained. Maybe if I can't see it at all, I'll learn to feel something real. Gabe didn't smile, but something softened in his posture. All right, he said, let's try. He tied the blindfold gently behind her head, checking that it wasn't too tight. Ready? He asked. No, she said honestly. Good. He placed his hands on her shoulders. You're safe. I won't let you fall. And she believed him. They started slow. His voice guided her steps. His hands corrected her frame. With every sway, every turn, she felt less like a CEO learning to dance and more like a woman remembering how to be. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time bent. Her heartbeat became the metronome. Her breath became the melody. And then something happened. She stopped thinking, stopped trying, and started dancing. When Gabe finally stopped the music and removed the blindfold, her face was flushed, her eyes blinking in disbelief. I didn't trip. No, he said. You flew. That afternoon, Gabe sat alone in the break room. Marcus entered carrying 2 paper cups of burnt coffee. You've got that face again, Marcus said, setting one down in front of him. What face? The one that says, I'm starting to feel things I shouldn't. Gabe gave him a look. We're dancing, Marcus. That's all. Marcus chuckled. You've danced with hundreds of women, but I've never seen you stretch before class. Gabe sighed. It's not like that. She makes you uncomfortable. She makes me aware of things I buried. Marcus leaned back. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Gabe stared at his cup. I promised Elena I'd always carry our past with honor. I don't know what it means if I start walking toward a future that doesn't include her. Marcus nodded, slow and thoughtful. She loved you. That kind of love doesn't lock you in. It frees you to live. Gabe didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. 2 nights later, Aurora couldn't sleep. Again. This time it wasn't guilt or ambition. It was the memory of Gabe's hands at her back. The way he didn't lead her to impress, but to steady. The way he made silence feel safe. She stepped onto her balcony, phone in hand, hesitating. Then she called him. He answered on the second ring. You okay? He asked, voice low. I don't know, she whispered. I needed to hear your voice. Another silence. You want to come back to the corridor, he asked. No, she said. Not tonight. Just tell me something real. He paused. When Elena died, Gabe said I stopped listening to music for over a year. Even the sound of a violin made me sick. Aurora said nothing. Until one night, Lena, barely 3, hummed something while playing with a doll. A tune Elena used to hum. And I broke. I wept on the floor for 20 minutes. Not because I missed Elena, but because I finally knew I was still capable of missing her. I wasn't numb anymore. And somehow that was the first step back. Aurora pressed a hand over her mouth, eyes misting. Thank you, she whispered. You asked for something real, he said softly. You deserved it. Days passed. They danced again and again, sometimes in silence, sometimes to music, sometimes in moments where no words could fill the distance between who they were and who they were becoming. One morning, Gabe handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "A music file," he said. "Custom piece. A slow waltz. Something I used to choreograph with Elena." Aurora looked at him, touched. "You're giving it to me." "I'm sharing it," he corrected, "with someone learning how to stand still without standing above." She looked at him a long time. "That's the first time you've said something kind to me that felt personal." Gabe half smiled. "That's because this time, it is." Aurora Layton had faced boardroom wars, courtroom threats, market crashes, and scandalous headlines. She had stood toe-to-toe with billionaires twice her age and never blinked. But this was different. She was standing outside the Layton Capitol boardroom, clutching a stack of reports she hadn't even read, heart thudding in her chest like it was trying to escape. Not from fear, from shame. Because the walls inside that room weren't just polished walnut and frosted glass. They were mirrors reflecting every decision she'd ever made to stay untouchable. But now she wasn't sure she wanted to be untouchable anymore. "Miss Layton," her assistant whispered, peeking out the door. "They're waiting." Aurora straightened her shoulders, walked in and took her seat at the head of the table, the throne she'd carved from years of brilliance and brutality. The meeting began like every